Sigmund Freud, the architect of the unconscious. You want to know my story? Very well. But be warned, the mind is a labyrinth, and once you enter, you may not find your way out. I spent my life mapping its twists and turns, its dark corners and hidden chambers. And what did I find? Not just the secrets of the psyche, but the secrets of humanity. Sit down. Let me tell you about the boy who loved too much, the scientist who dared to dream, and the man who changed the way we see ourselves. Let me tell you about me. I was born on May 6, 1856, in Freiburg, a small town in Moravia. My father, Jacob, was a wool merchant, a man of modest means but grand dreams for his children. My mother, Amalia, was his third wife, young, beautiful, and only 21 when I was born. She called me her golden Siggy, and I believed her. I was her firstborn, her favorite, and for a time, her whole world. But favoritism, as I would later discover, is a double-edged sword. When my siblings arrived, 7 in all, I felt the sting of displacement. My half-brothers, Emmanuel and Philip, were closer in age to my mother than to me, and my younger brothers and sisters seemed to steal the attention I had once monopolized. I resented them, even as I loved them. This tension, this push and pull of love and jealousy, would later become a cornerstone of my theories. My father was a storyteller. He would sit me on his knee and tell me tales from the Torah, from the Talmud, from the lives of great men. One story in particular stayed with me. When I was 10 or 12, he told me how as a young man he had been walking down the street when a Christian knocked his hat into the mud and ordered him to pick it up. My father complied. When I asked him why, he said, "Because I am a Jew, and a Jew does not fight back." I was horrified, not by his compliance, but by the shame of it. Why should a man be forced to endure such humiliation? Why should he not fight back? This moment haunted me for years. It made me question authority, question submission, question the very nature of power. And it planted the seed for my later belief that the mind, too, is a battleground, where desires clash with duty, where the past wars with the present. I was a voracious reader. By the time I was 8, I was devouring Shakespeare, Goethe, and the great philosophers. I was particularly drawn to the works of Darwin, whose theories of evolution challenged the very foundations of religion and science. If humans were not divinely created, but the product of millions of years of adaptation, then what did that mean for the soul, for free will, for the very essence of what it meant to be human? At 17, I enrolled in the University of Vienna to study medicine. Why medicine? Because I wanted to understand the human body, yes, but also because I wanted to understand the mind. And in the 19th century, the mind was still the domain of philosophers, not scientists. I wanted to change that. Vienna in the 1870s was a city of contradictions. On the surface, it was a hub of culture, art, and intellectual debate. Beneath that, it was a city of simmering tensions, anti-Semitism, political unrest, the slow unraveling of the Habsburg Empire. I loved it. The coffee houses, the theatres, the salons where artists and thinkers gathered to debate the issues of the day. It was intoxicating. I began my medical career in the laboratory of Ernst Brücke, a pioneer in physiology. Brücke was a strict empiricist, a man who believed that all living phenomena could be explained by the laws of physics and chemistry. Under his guidance, I studied the nervous systems of fish, particularly the spinal cords of eels. It was tedious work, but it taught me the value of precision, of patience, of evidence. And it reinforced my belief that the mind, like the body, could be studied scientifically. But I didn't want to spend my life dissecting eels. I wanted to study people. So I turned my attention to the human brain, working under Theodor Meinert, a leading neuroanatomist. Meinert was a brilliant but difficult man, and our relationship was often strained. But he taught me something invaluable. The brain was not just a collection of cells. It was the seat of the mind, the source of thought, emotion, and behavior. In the 1880s, I became fascinated with cocaine. At the time, it was a little-known substance, and I believed it could revolutionize medicine. I experimented with it myself, and even prescribed it to friends and patients, touting its ability to cure depression and morphine addiction. I wrote a paper, uber coca, praising its benefits. But my enthusiasm blinded me to its dangers. When the addictive properties of cocaine became known, my reputation suffered. I was forced to confront a painful truth. Even the brightest minds can be led astray by their own desires. This episode taught me humility, and it reinforced my belief in the power of the unconscious. In 1885, I traveled to Paris to study under Jean-Martin Charcot, a neurologist who was revolutionizing the understanding of hysteria. Hysteria was a mysterious condition, primarily affecting women, that caused a wide range of symptoms: paralysis, blindness, seizures, without any apparent physical cause. The medical establishment dismissed it as malingering or, worse, as a sign of moral weakness. Charcot, however, believed it was a real physiological condition, one that could be studied and treated. Charcot's work fascinated me. He used hypnosis to induce and relieve hysterical symptoms, demonstrating that the mind could create physical manifestations of psychological distress. But I was troubled by one question. Why did the mind do this? What was the purpose of these symptoms? Charcot didn't have an answer, but I was determined to find one. In 1886, I returned to Vienna and opened my own medical practice. I was 30 years old, newly married to Martha Bernays, and eager to make my mark. But the cases that came to me were not the ones I expected, not fevers or broken bones, but broken minds. Women, and some men, who suffered from inexplicable symptoms: nightmares, tics, paralyses, phobias. I tried everything: hypnosis, electrotherapy, rest cures, but nothing worked. Then one day, I had a radical idea. What if these symptoms weren't physical at all? What if they were psychological? What if they were the result of memories, traumas, things the patients had buried deep in their minds? I began to experiment. I asked my patients to lie down on my now famous couch and talk. Not about their symptoms, but about their lives, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. And as they talked, something extraordinary happened. Their symptoms began to fade. This was the birth of the talking cure, the foundation of psychoanalysis. Anna O. was my most famous patient, though she would later distance herself from my work. She was a brilliant, troubled young woman who suffered from a range of hysterical symptoms, including paralysis, hallucinations, and a strange inability to speak her native German. She could only speak English, a language she had learned as a child. Through our sessions, I discovered that her symptoms were linked to traumatic memories, specifically the illness and death of her father. When she spoke about these memories, her symptoms would temporarily disappear. This led me to believe that hysteria was caused by repressed trauma, and that the act of bringing these memories to consciousness could relieve the symptoms. But here's the truth. Anna O's treatment was not entirely successful. She remained troubled for years, and her case was more of a collaboration with my colleague Joseph Breuer than a solo triumph. Still, it was a beginning that would change everything. Dreams had fascinated me since childhood. Why do we dream? What do our dreams mean? In 1899, I published The Interpretation of Dreams, a book that would become my magnum opus. In it, I argued that dreams were not random nonsense, but the royal road to the unconscious. They were, I believed, the mind's way of fulfilling wishes, often dark, hidden wishes that we couldn't acknowledge in our waking lives. The book was not an immediate success. In fact, it sold only 600 copies in its first 6 years, but it laid the foundation for everything that came after. It introduced the world to the idea of the unconscious mind, a part of the psyche that operates below the level of conscious awareness, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. In The Interpretation of Dreams, I propose that the mind is divided into 3 parts. The id, the primitive, instinctual part of the mind that seeks immediate gratification. It operates on the pleasure principle, demanding satisfaction regardless of consequences. The ego, the rational, conscious part of the mind that mediates between the id and the external world. It operates on the reality principle, balancing desires with the demands of reality. The superego, the moral, ethical part of the mind that internalizes the rules and values of society. It operates on the morality principle, striving for perfection and punishing the ego with guilt when it falls short. These 3 parts are in constant conflict, and much of human behavior, I believed, is the result of this internal struggle. One of my most controversial ideas was the Oedipus complex, named after the Greek myth of Oedipus, who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. I proposed that every child, at some point between the ages of 3 and 6, experiences a desire for the parent of the opposite sex and sees the same-sex parent as a rival. This desire is eventually repressed, but it leaves a lasting mark on the psyche, influencing our relationships, our fears, and our desires. The Oedipus complex was met with outrage. Critics called it absurd, even perverse. But I believed it was a universal truth, a fundamental part of human development. And while later psychologists have challenged its universality, the idea that our early relationships shape our adult lives remains a cornerstone of modern psychology. Not everyone was pleased with my ideas. In fact, most people weren't. The medical establishment called me a charlatan. The public called me a pervert. The Catholic Church called me a heretic. And the Nazis? Well, they burned my books. But here's the thing about controversy. It forces you to refine your ideas. It forces you to ask, am I wrong? And I did ask that, often. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had wasted my life on a fantasy. But then a patient would walk into my office, someone who had been suffering for years, and after months of analysis, they would leave healed. Not cured by a pill or a surgery, but by words, by understanding, by facing the truths they had buried. In 1902, a small group of followers began to gather around me. We called ourselves the Wednesday Psychological Society, and we met in my apartment to discuss my theories, debate their merits, and explore their implications. From these humble beginnings grew the International Psychoanalytic Association, a movement that would spread across the world. But even within this group, there were disagreements. Some of my followers, like Carl Jung and Alfred Adler, broke away to form their own schools of thought. Jung, in particular, disagreed with my emphasis on sexuality, arguing that the unconscious was more spiritual than biological. Adler, on the other hand, believed that the driving force behind human behavior was not sexual desire, but the will to power. These schisms were painful, but they were also inevitable. Science, after all, is not a monolith. It is a conversation, a debate, a constant process of revision and refinement. I must address two controversial aspects of my work, my views on women and my views on religion. On women, I believed that women were inherently inferior to men, a view that reflected the biases of my time. I proposed the idea of penis envy, suggesting that women resented their lack of a penis, and by extension, their lack of power in a male-dominated world. These ideas are now widely criticized, and rightly so. They were a product of my era, but that does not excuse them. On religion, I was an atheist who saw religion as an illusion, a product of the unconscious mind. I believed that religion was a way for humans to cope with the helplessness of childhood, a way to project their need for a protective father figure onto the universe. In The Future of an Illusion, I argued that religion was a crutch, one that humanity would eventually outgrow. This view was met with outrage, but I stood by it. By the 1930s, the world was changing. The Nazis rose to power, and Vienna, my beloved Vienna, became a dangerous place for a Jewish intellectual. In 1938, after the Anschluss, the Gestapo paid me a visit. They made me sign a document stating that I had been treated well. I signed it. What choice did I have? But I added a line of my own. I can most highly recommend the Gestapo to anyone. That same year, I fled to London. I was 82 years old, my jaw ravaged by cancer from years of smoking, but my mind was as sharp as ever. I continued to write, to see patients, to fight for my ideas. On September 21st, 1939, I turned to my doctor, Max Schur, and said, "My dear Schur, you remember our first talk. You promised me then you would help me when I could no longer carry on. It is only torture now, and it has no longer any sense." 2 days later, Schur administered a lethal dose of morphine, and I slipped away. My daughter Anna was with me at the end. She would later become a renowned psychoanalyst in her own right, carrying on my work and expanding it in ways I could never have imagined. But my ideas did not die with me. After my death, Psychoanalysis spread like wildfire. It influenced art, literature, film, politics. It changed the way we think about ourselves. And yet, it also faced criticism. Some of my theories, like the Oedipus complex, like the emphasis on childhood sexuality, were challenged, revised, even rejected. And you know what? That's how science works. It's not about being right. It's about asking the right questions. Today, psychoanalysis is no longer the dominant force it once was. Cognitive behavioral therapy, psychopharmacology, and neuroscience have taken center stage. But the questions I asked, the questions that drove me my entire life, remain as relevant as ever. Why do we do the things we do? How do our childhood experiences shape our adult lives? What lies beneath the surface of our conscious minds? And how can we face the truths we've buried? So here we are, my friend. You sitting in that armchair. And me, well, me wherever I am now. Do I believe everything I wrote? Yes. And no. I believed it at the time, with all my heart. But I was also a man of my era, a Victorian, a product of my time. Some of my ideas were revolutionary, some were wrong, and some are still being debated. But here's what I know for certain. The mind is a vast, uncharted territory. We are not just our bodies, our jobs, our bank accounts. We are the sum of our memories, our dreams, our fears. We are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And sometimes those stories are lies. So tell me, my friend, what's your story? What truths have you buried? And what would happen if you brought them to light?
Thank you for watching. While the goal of Unbound American Stories is to share the stories of American heroes, we will at times also highlight the lives and accomplishments of heroes from around the world. Today's hero is part of our Champions of Health from Around the World series. In this series, we present our hero in the words we imagine that they might have said, and in a voice that we imagine might have been similar to their actual voice. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn about other forgotten or underappreciated heroes, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Who should we uncover next? Did we miss an important fact? Did we get something wrong? Do you know more about today's hero that you would like to share? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep the flame of curiosity alive.